thing in the chat. So I guess we can start having Yuliya get
Thank you
set.
very much, Ulrika.
Yes, Yuliya Desyatova, also PhD candidate at OISE, and she's going to talk to us about standardizing language teaching and learning in the settlement context in Canada, caution required. And again, 15 minutes plus 5 minutes of questions. And I will remind you of the time.
Thank you very much, Enrica, and everyone. Thank you for being here on Saturday afternoon. So you see, I usually change the second part of the title by the end I finish preparing the presentation. So this is what happened this time. I decided to be explicit from the very beginning. So we are switching context from children to adults and from Mexico to Canada. I'll be talking about the program in Canada that is called LINK. I'll introduce the context in the beginning. So those are two abbreviations I'll be using a lot, LINK and PBLA. So we'll look at PBLA as a standardization tool. We'll look closely at practitioner perspective. There will be a lot of dense slides with quotes from interviews with teachers. So I'll invite you, if you get interested, to review this maybe later and read the full quotes. We might not have time to get through them, but they are very rich and provide you with a lot of insights into why standardization may be problematic in this context. So somehow the change slide menu is hidden sometimes. Okay, so we're looking at standardization, and the program is called Language Instruction for Newcomers to Canada. Every immigrant or refugee in Canada has the right to attend free language classes. They start with an assessment center where they are assessed according to Canadian language benchmark as the language standard. And then they are referred to a LINK service provider, a school that could be a private provider or a college or a community organization. And all these schools across Canada, no matter what level the learners are, from literacy to advanced academic preparation, have to use so-called portfolio-based language assessment. And again, I encourage you to call it PBLA because it is very different from various other examples of portfolio use in language learning. And we will look at what kind of impact standardization has had on these programs. So there have been quite contradictory findings on PBLA previously, but most research studies, again, if you compare policy making discourse and research studies, there will be different findings. So most research studies found quite concerning impact of PBLA introduction on the LINK overall. And previous findings from my large studies would be that teachers have difficulties interpreting and applying CLB as a language standard. And another major study that got persistently almost ignored by the official discourse is the teacher resistance. And I believe the conflict between standardization and the realities of the LINK system will be contributing to explaining that resistance. So again, I'm highlighting the distinction between PBLA and the learner portfolio. They are not really the same. It's a mostly teacher-centered portfolio. However, according to its designers, it was supposed to bring multiple benefits, such as being learner-centered, promoting alternative assessment, and presumably helping to replace the grammar-centered teaching with task-based language teaching, more oriented to more closely aligned with real-life challenges of adult newcomers. And another goal that is reiterated throughout policy documents is LINK program standardization. As you can see from these quotes from policymakers, standardization was seen as necessary, and lack of standards and consistency was seen as a challenge, as a problem that needs to be tackled. So this is what I've done, designed a mixed methods study, which was not focused on standardization at that point. It was exploratory, and I collected surveys and conducted interviews with teachers and link program administrators. This is the data that was collected in the large project, but today I'm focusing on 2 practitioner interviews that highlight the conflict between standardization and link as a complex system. We'll talk about complex systems in a second. But these are the 2 conceptual nodes that were used to code qualitative data. So employing complexity theory, there were subnodes of variability, sensitivity to initial conditions, and importance of context. And this was explaining the multiple comments on the negative impact of PBLA on the link system. So unfortunately, despite the claims that PBLA was expected to improve assessment quality and assessment reliability, according to participants, those did not increase, and there was no consistent way of applying PBLA. So the desired impact was not achieved. This graph represents a summary of quantitized data. So the number of participants who referred to a particular theme, for example, questionable assessment quality, you can see the blue color dominates across the groups and the phases, except the PBLA leads group, where they still comment quite frequently in orange on lack of consistency in PBLA. So possibly improved consistency in gray is the smallest theme amongst the participants. So the major finding is that PBLA did not increase standardization. And of course, we are starting to ask the question why that happened. And from the data, it became apparent that it's neglect of complexity theory principles and seeing link as a complicated rather than a complex system that resulted in such lack of desired impact. So there is a lot of literature on complex theory in the last few decades. You probably all know the names of Diane Larson Freeman. She's written extensively. So in my, again, data analysis, I focused on these 3 principles: intrinsic variability, sensitivity to initial conditions, and importance of context. And another theme that came up was teachers were frequently commenting on inadequacy of linear patterns. And I can explain that with an example of a Likert scale item. Lots of items were phrased like PBLA has improved student retention in the program, or PBLA has improved this or other part of the link program. And lots of comments were phrased as, but you can't say that. It depends on so many different factors. So teachers themselves are widely aware of how complex the system is and how difficult it is to stimulate change in the desired direction. So again, these principles, not articulated as complexity theory principles, but comments that could be categorized under these principles were mentioned quite frequently. As you can see again in blue, intrinsic variability was one of the most frequently mentioned things. Similarly, importance of context, and PBLA was seen overwhelmingly as irresponsive to the variety of contexts in particular classrooms and individual context of students. So these are the 2 focal participants. They chose pseudonyms of Astra and Pamela. You can see they are similar in age. They've had extensive teaching and administration experience. Astra mentioned during the interview, in total, she's been in the field of language teaching for over 43 years. She's since retired. So this is what they've said, for example, how intrinsic variability was represented in the interviews. Again, I will not read all those quotes, but you can see Pamela commenting on having mostly refugees in one school and investors who drive their Lexus in another center. And she says, you cannot have an education system that tries to pretend these are the same, because they are not. And again, Astra questioned the PBLA guidelines to base instruction on the needs of the students, because if there is such a diverse student body in every particular classroom, it's really difficult to design a needs-based curriculum by individual teachers, what PBLA requires to. So on sensitivity to initial conditions, most comments of the data were centered around, again, literacy students, for whom even as early as 2012, PBLA was found inappropriate because of its having metacognitive expectations. So as Pamela said, you can't impose a model like that on people who have never gone to school. It's a very difficult change for them. Students have a hard time understanding what needs assessment is, how to conduct self-assessment and peer assessment. A similar sensitivity to initial conditions is present amongst teachers, where you have somebody who is just starting to teach after a few months long TESOL training program, where people do not have any in-depth training in either linguistic pedagogy or any other disciplines that people with the master's program might have, and imposing a similar protocol, PBLA is actually called a protocol, on all of those teachers does not do a good favor to potentially any of those extremes. So importance of context was again frequently mentioned, and you see the examples in some programs in Ontario. You can have up to 40 students per class with continuous enrollment. And in that context, Pamela sees PBLA ends up being the opposite of what it's supposed to be. And again, she comments on difficulty to transfer an idea that worked in one particular context to other situations that could be very different. And again, Astra refers to really diverse needs that are not met by PBLA because it doesn't get them past settlement. It's not really convertible. It's not a currency to wherever an immigrant tries to move on to after link. And inadequacy of complicated approaches to complex systems was mentioned very frequently by Astra. You can see 16 mentions. She was talking here about quite a few examples of programs that she and her colleagues developed and was trying to pitch to the government as meeting different needs of immigrant families at the same time. But because of division between the branches of government, municipal, provincial, and federal, those programs had very hard time getting funded. And again, Pamela sees PBLA as a top-down theoretical construct that assumes that everyone is the same and disregards the differences between individual learners and their situations. So again, Astra is referring to complexity of link many times, and she says it's what's going to kill PBLA, because if you follow the PBLA guidelines, it becomes narrower and narrower, and you don't see the results you want. So I like to refer to simple definitions before exploring the kind of scholarly meaning of concepts, because that's what probably most individual teachers will be working is. So we are trying, when we are standardizing, we are trying to make things the same as each other. And immediately a question comes up. We're talking about people, not things. And do they have to be the same as each other? As we just seen from the participants' comments, people are very different. Again, there's been a lot of literature on distinctions between complicated and complex systems. I don't have time to go into that. But this article by I'm not sure how to pronounce the name, Weers, was not written about link and not about PBLA, but the analysis of potentially controversial impact of standardization was so illustrating PBLA that I've placed quite a few comments on the next few slides. So overly ambitious efforts to standardize are likely to create disorder in a complex system, according to Weers 2015. And you can see lots of explanation to exactly the problems that emerged from PBLA data. It explains teacher resistance by disregard and the gap between actual work of practitioners and standardized routines. You can see the explanation of unintended consequences as a sign that our understanding of how the system works is narrow and flawed. It's insufficient. That's why we think that protocolizing language learning through PBLA could be helpful. And minimal positive impact happens because standardization is equated with quality, which is hardly appropriate for language teaching and learning. So the paper-based protocol, things look better on paper, whether they actually work better or not. Again, it sounds as if it's been written about PBLA. I couldn't have said it better. More controversies. We tend to see standardization as a technical process, not politically biased, but it is privileging one worldview over another. I know I'm almost out of time. Sorry. So it's hardly learner-centered and it's hardly practitioner inclusive. I'll try to finish in maybe 30 seconds. So we are trying to get
You
rid
have
of
a few more minutes. Depends
okay,
how many
Yuliya.
questions you want.
We see this tendency to get rid almost to minimize diversity instead of welcoming it and addressing this diversity. So in addition to criticizing potentially standardization effort, the author offers us guidance into what kind of context could be where standardization can produce more benefits and where it is unlikely to produce more benefits. So the higher frequency of special cases, we can call it diversity in the linked class or among teachers, and the fewer clearly delineated solutions, the less benefits the system will get from standardization. And it looks like immigrant language learning is such a complex system that is really far from those highly controlled and easily understood context as manufacturing and construction. So lots of questions about why standardization was chosen as a goal and about possibility of achieving beneficial outcomes. So standardization cannot be equated with quality. It's hardly desirable or appropriate in the diverse link among the students, teachers, and service providers. And unfortunately, by trying to reduce the complexity, we are possibly undermining system effectiveness. Again, there should be different approaches for novice practitioners and for novice and expert language learners. Again, many of our students have learned quite a few languages and they may have their own productive routines that PBLA may seem to dismiss. I think I'm done. So we have to focus on quality assurance rather than standardization and assuming that those two are the same. Here are my references and I'm looking forward to your questions. Thank you very much.